Welcome to Masterclass Cinema, the series where I discuss one aspect of a movie I love and still feel inspired by for its technical achievements. Today we'll be covering the found footage smash hit, The Blair Witch Project. Although the film doesn't look cinematic, it still knocked the 1990s Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles film off of its perch of being the highest grossing independent film at the time. But where my respect for The Blair Witch Project mostly lays in how much of an experiment the film is. A mixture of a clear vision regarding the setting, threat, and tone, but it was mostly all left in the hands of the three actors, the dialogue, the cinematography, and to an extent, the plot. And even though that sounds like a mess, directors Daniel Myrick and Eduardo Sanchez kept the consistency of the film strong, as well as give it the freedom to keep evolving. And before we get started, it's with great pleasure that I'd like to introduce my special guest, the one, the only, Spooky Astronauts.
Hi, my name is Emma. I'm also known as Spooky Astronauts here on YouTube, and yes, I'm another Australian creator. My channel is solely focused on horror and thriller content, giving you plenty of hidden gems that you haven't heard of, reviews and spoiler-free content, letting you know what's out and what I recommend to watch. And I'm so honored to be here today, especially because The Blair Witch Project is one of my favorite films of all time, so thank you so much for having me. So without further ado, let's talk about The Blair Witch.
It's either one thing to praise or criticize this movie on what it shows and doesn't show, the execution and the presentation. But the actual making of this film is such a 1 in a million shot. The amount in which this movie was planned and not planned literally created a cultural phenomenon without a formula. It wasn't until Paranormal Activity came out a decade later, which would show us how easy the process of making a found footage movie could be. Suddenly you can utilize a simple, mundane setting and a traditional horror plot using the style of a handheld camcorder. And suddenly through the found footage genre, horror movies could be made much cheaper and faster. There may have been some entries in the subgenre post The Blair Witch, but it wasn't until Paranormal Activity when the found footage genre exploded. But this is where The Blair Witch Project still stands tall. The setting and execution of The Blair Witch is so simple on paper. 3 film students camp in a forest and attempt to document anything regarding this old town legend. The production will be 3 actors camping in the woods for 8 days. We will shake the tent, leave objects outside for them to find the next day. The showdown will take place in an abandoned house, and essentially you're not going to see any creature. Also, it's filmed on 2 contrasting film formats, one of which will never be good enough quality for cinema screens. With such a low-tech production, how are they not pumping out Blair Witch clones every single year since? Well, that's where the behind the scenes of the Blair Witch Project is genuinely intimidating to anyone looking to slap together a found footage horror film. This movie was part of the new 90s independent cinema boom, when suddenly the established Hollywood norm was thrown out the window and new perspectives and taboos were being explored. Suddenly big studio filmmaking was being overshadowed by small homegrown stories filmed on micro budgets and cheaper cameras. Established styles were being deconstructed and reinvented. What the Blair Witch Project offered in terms of story is nothing original. Campers go into the woods and get attacked by a monster. Easy peasy story. But the way in which you get to experience this story is like nothing you would have ever seen before. What you are getting is their camera recordings during these events in sequence of when it was filmed, and that's it. This isn't a cinematic reenactment of a real story. This isn't intercut with interviews and a narration. No music to tell you what to feel during specific moments. A story told in the most raw, straightforward way. And making the 3 main characters amateur film students helps keep the believability all throughout this movie. No one is whipping out expertise of the history of Blair, a deep knowledge in witchcraft, or special camping skills from childhood to navigate their way out of the forest. The Blair Witch Project follows 3 edgy 90s teens.
Should we all cut our fingers open and bleed on it? A little bloodletting on the slate?
That's good. That's good, thank you.
What killed this dead mouse? Witchcraft?
How about God?
But also, being entry-level filmmakers helped produce a competently shot found footage movie. Just the right amount of film gear distributed between 3 characters without being a full-on production. We have Heather, the pretentious director of this project.
They went into the woods prepared to find death. What they found was a desecration of humanity at the site which trappers have often referred to as Coffin Rock.
Serving as the Captain Ahab of the story, pushing onwards trying to document something amazing.
What?
Nothing. I don't know why you have to have every conversation on video, man. Tape some evidence.
Because we're making a documentary.
Not about us getting lost. We're making a documentary about a witch.
She brought the Hi8 camcorder to document the behind the scenes of her own project. Also helped document all of the characters' breaking points.
I can't believe you can be such an asshole! What the fuck were you thinking?
on, man. You got her back. Good one.
No, she's still making movies, man. That's my point.
Please stop.
This is my point here.
It's all I fucking have left, okay? Just please stop.
Next, there's Josh, the one who knows how to use a camera. Well, for the most part.
So you measured for meters? What? We're not in Europe.
Well, the fucking lens has meters on it, okay?
It also has our system. But I thought you've used this camera before, man.
I've used it like once before.
He's responsible for actually filming Heather's project with the 16mm black and white film camera. To which, once the actual filming of Heather's project gets abandoned, they still continue to use the camera for its light. Finally, there's Mike. He's the newbie that's unfamiliar with this group.
How are you, Mike? It's nice to meet you.
I'm tired, but I'm doing good. I'm real excited about this. Thank you for
I'm
the
very
opportunity.
glad. Well, thank you for getting the equipment together.
He's the first one to get frustrated by Heather's reassurance of where they're going despite being horrifically lost.
I don't.
Lost? Admit that first. Because
I know we're not lost.
oh, you knew that yesterday too, and you knew that twice
Look,
today.
did you agree to do this project?
I did. I agreed to a scouted out project. I didn't
It
agree
is
to just
scouted out, and I
around
told you
the
that
woods.
getting to the location
okay.
wasn't gonna
But more importantly, Mike brings an essential element to this production that most would take for granted, the DAT recorder. The important role of recording sound, and especially in the 90s, recording sound on tape. Now that you know who these characters are and what equipment they use, now you know how rough it was for these 3 actors to camp in the woods for 8 days during this production, and also to have to lug this heavy equipment around themselves. Along with spare clothes, food, and survival gear, they also had to pack this equipment in their massive backpacks.
I could help you, but I'd rather stand and record.
This was not a film shoot of setting up a shot, action, cut, reset, take 2. The actors actually had to rough it in the woods, sleep in the one tent together. No showers, no makeup, no catering. What you see is what you get. In fact, the only thing the production team did for the actors was pack up and transport their tent for them. Prior to the 8-day production, the 3 leads were actually put through a boot camp with producer Greg Hale. Hale served 4 years in the US Army and used his military training to prepare the actors to survive on their own in the woods for 8 days.
We'll take care of you as a person. You take care of yourself as a character. If there's ever an emergency, we bring in the officials, just like you would in any situation. Except we'll have cell phones and radios. You guys will have a radio that you'll constantly be in contact with us.
The actors actually had an early version of the GPS to help navigate them through the woods. So even though the 3 leads had to rough it in the woods, they weren't walking around blind. The directors would set up a plot location such as the rock piles, the stick figures, the house at the end, and program in the coordinates to that location into the GPS. The actors would just simply walk to it and film as they went. After a full day of shooting, the 3 leads would return to the tent and leave the cameras, footage, and batteries in a basket outside of the tent. Once they were asleep, the directors would take the basket and review the footage from that day. Then when the actors would wake up the next morning, the basket would be refilled with food, charged batteries, and specific notes for each character's motivation for the day. But none of the actors were allowed to show each other their notes. So, although there was a guideline script for the overall story, directors Daniel Myrick and Eduardo Sanchez gave so much creative freedom to the actors to keep building their own character development. They allowed the story to grow organically, whether they were keeping the actors on track with the script or allowing on-the-spot inspiration to keep the story evolving in a better direction. I think one of the biggest examples of this was Mike was originally the one who was meant to vanish instead of Josh. They all knew this from pre-production, they just didn't know when. However, as the 3 leads kept evolving their characters in their own natural, frustrated, and exhausted directions, after constantly bickering with Heather, Josh was now beginning to try to be the peacemaker.
Okay, so we deal with the fact my camera's not going to be back, your dad's not going to be back. No blame from now on about that shit.
The directors noticed that Mike was becoming more of the antagonist.
But I kicked that fucking map into the creek yesterday. It was useless. The map wasn't doing shit all day.
If we get hurt or if we die out here, it's your fault!
And so, on the fly, they then got Josh out of there, which not only changed the script, it then made Heather and Mike have to react the way their characters would react.
Probably at the river or something.
If he was at the river, he could hear me from here.
Josh!
Let's go. We gotta find him.
We can't even find the car! How the fuck are we gonna find Josh?
Which is such a credit to the actors and how they stuck to their performances, no matter how much the directors kept throwing them curveballs.
Why you can't get in the creek either. This is not the way to get out of here.
Heather had sort of been the catalyst for their problems, and Mike was so frustrated on how lost they'd become. Suddenly, with the wrong person from the script being taken away, their characters had to become more supportive of each other. And this is where the curveballs begin.
We bought these goggles to protect our eyes at night. We're gonna be running through the woods, scaring the actors, which is like just circle them and make noise and go in different directions.
Hello?
Oh, shit.
You hear that?
The night the actors wake up to hearing Josh screaming in the distance, this was to an extent real. The directors were actually sitting on a hill from a distance away with Josh and actually making him scream in the woods.
Josh, where are you? Tell me where you are!
Oh my God!
Josh!
But Mike and Heather had no idea where to look, due to it being pitch black in front of them. The following night, they actually had a pre-recording of Josh screaming that they played from a boombox.
You ready?
Here, take it.
It can't be him.
Once the actors got further into the shoot, they got much better at filming what the script needed, without the direction of the filmmakers. Apparently the first time the actors walked into the area with the stick figures hanging from the trees, they kind of had a lackluster reaction, and they themselves thought, no wait, this is meant to be a big reveal moment. So they actually backtracked and re-entered that area with their bigger reactions as seen in the film.
There's stuff down here!
What kind of stuff?
Voodoo shit!
What?
Voodoo stuff is hanging all over, look around!
No way.
They're all over the place.
Holy shit.
That being said, the morning Heather woke up to the wrapped up bundle of sticks outside of the tent. Since Josh vanished and they didn't know what to expect, she just thought that the sticks wrapped up in his shirt was the scare. When she throws it away, one of the producers saw her do that from a distance with binoculars, and then actually ran down to tell her to go back and open it. So when she goes back to check, her shock is genuine.
It's all full of blood.
For the most part, the actors had so much creative freedom to get the coverage of the script, and there were only a few set pieces that required multiple takes and the directors being there to give direction. When the three leads are getting attacked in the tent and run out, the crew had made a path for them to run through in pitch black without falling over. And in this moment,
Oh my God, what the fuck is that? What the fuck is that?
this was one of the producers dressed up in an all-white tracksuit and gauze. Unfortunately, this moment wasn't caught on camera, but it still helps this film's overall fear of the unknown aesthetic. Would you rather a glimpse at a monster that looked terrible, or keep using your imagination? Finally, for the climax of this film, the directors had found an old abandoned house, which they reinforced the floors to be more stable, and had a few of their nieces and nephews come in and paint handprints all over the walls. They set the coordinates of the house on the actor's GPS.
My direction said, when you wake up and hear a noise tonight you will follow the noise with the video camera.
Heather's character notes was just to follow Mike. They set up a boombox in the roof and a boombox in the basement, both of which played Josh's screaming. They played the audio from the roof, which led them upstairs, then played the audio from the basement.
So I take off. My direction was to abandon Heather and go first.
Mike heard Josh's screaming and ran downstairs, leaving Heather upstairs, and the directors and producers were in the basement, dressed in black, waiting for Mike. After tackling him and grabbing the camera, they told Mike to stand in the corner and face the wall. Finally, Heather makes her way down to the basement, creating one of the most iconic shots in horror movie history.
So if you saw the Blair Witch Project first, then you saw the cultural phenomenon that everyone knows. But if you saw The Curse of the Blair Witch on the Sci-Fi Channel a few months earlier, what you saw was what the film was actually meant to be. So what now sits on the special features menu on the DVD is what the filmmakers originally planned on making. A fake documentary with the found footage element being used for cutaways in between interviews. This is now a good time to bring up the two films prior to the Blair Witch Project's release that staked the claim as the first incarnations of the found footage genre. And they are Cannibal Holocaust and The Last Broadcast. That being said, Cannibal Holocaust is a narrative with traditional cinematography and scripted scenes. The found footage element of the film is a few documentarians get killed by a native tribe and their film footage is found and observed. This is where the scripted narrative comes into play. What Cannibal Holocaust can claim is tricking the public into thinking this missing crew and their footage was real, leading the filmmakers going on trial for potential manslaughter. But essentially, it's still a movie. You know what I mean. The Last Broadcast is a similar concept and premise to the Blair Witch Project. People documenting an urban legend in the woods. But just like the original concept of the Blair Witch Project, the film is still essentially a fake documentary with interviews and documentary editing. What the Blair Witch Project ultimately became is, from start to finish, you'll watch the assembly cut of just the footage that was found by the supposing missing characters of the film. No interviews, no music, no cutaways, no narration. Granted, the Blair Witch Project has interviews at the start, but that is within the context of the documentary that the characters are making in the film. There are no after-the-fact interviews that add exposition. Speaking of exposition, let's get into what they decided to cut out of the film. After the 8-day shoot in the woods, the production continued filming the rest of the intended script. As they started editing, they soon realized that the footage of the 3 campers was much more compelling. Slowly but surely, the documentary editing with the interviews and the actual Blair Witch lore became less and less. Ultimately, they decided to focus the entire film on just the found footage. You are no longer going to watch a fake documentary talking about 3 filmmakers who got lost in the woods. You're going to live with them.
I want to really avoid any cheese. I want to present this in as straightforward a way as possible, and I think the legend is unsettling enough.
Suddenly, when this film was going to feature all the Blair Witch lore that the writers and directors have been working on for years prior to the production, it was all encapsulated in the brief on the spot interviews at the start of the film.
1940, some of the young kids started to disappear.
What he did is he took the kids down to the basement by twos and he made one face into the corner.
Really? Uh-huh.
And they were camped near the cabin or something that she's supposed to haunt.
And all of the leftover interview footage of the 3 filmmakers, friends and family.
Josh used to go out with Mike to, go drinking and stuff.
A film shoot of the Ruston Park character.
Mr. Parr, you've been sentenced to death. You feel this is fair? Yes. Mr. Parr, do you think God has forgiven you? Yes.
The pre-production photos of the 3 leads prior to the events of the film, all of the exposition and the answers were repurposed into a mini documentary that aired on the Sci-Fi Channel before the film's release. So, if you saw The Curse of the Blair Witch first, then you got all of the backstory of the witch, and then you got to watch these 3 filmmakers walk straight into their own demise. And if you didn't, well, you got to watch 3 filmmakers walk straight into their own demise. It's sort of a win-win. The Curse of the Blair Witch documentary is such a good complementary piece for the movie, but the film still works without it. No one is constantly asking forced questions to keep the audience up to speed because the Blair Witch lore works as both rich and detailed, yet simple but effective. The 3 film students mostly complain about wanting to leave and get home. Despite these characters being filmmakers, they are not experts on the town of Blair, and this isn't an expedition with scientists into well-known cursed woods. This is a few moody college students who get lost while camping, so you'll be getting that level of thinking and rationality.
I'm not going into your fucking pants to get your goddamn map, man.
I just checked my pocket. It's not in my pants.
Look, would I go in and get your map? All I want to do is get out of here, man. I'm not fucking around.
That's all I want to, man.
Your map was useless! This was your own map was useless!
Exactly where we were on that map.
I knew exactly where we were on that map!
The DVD and Blu-ray only has one deleted scene of the characters discussing their situation, which, although natural, is the only time they dig up exposition for the audience.
I mean, if it's not the Blair Witch and it's not redneck, my take on it is that it's humans. It's fucked up humans. It's someone who's probably severely demented.
Yeah, but there's more than one, man.
But
there's not just
we
one
hear
person.
sounds all around us.
Also, if you wanted a post-discussion on the map, this deleted scene has you covered.
In my defense about the map, you crinkled it up and threw it on the ground. I kicked it in the creek. That's what happened.
Yeah,
And
but
I'm
crinkling.
still sorry about that. I'm really sorry.
And so, with all of the documentary elements being cut out of the edit, it allowed the directors to then focus on crafting the actual story into an entertaining narrative, without the structural pauses of the interviews and the voiceover to hold your hand throughout the visual circus of two contrasting camera formats and shaky cam. The filmmakers had to get creative. This is where the behind the scenes of the film are still impressive. Even in editing, the film continued to flip the script of conventional horror filmmaking. Directors Daniel Myrick and Eduardo Sanchez told the leads to film as much as possible, no matter what it was. Just film, film, film. And after an 8-day shoot in the woods, they were left with 40 hours of footage, resulting in the original cut being 3 hours long. They had given the filmmakers so much material to use that it was here where the directors were able to alter the character development however they wanted, since they had so much footage. Apparently, Heather and Josh were improvising arguments and bickering from day one, so it seemed as if there was tension from the get-go. And to allow the film to ramp up the tension, the directors made the creative decision to cut out a lot of that bickering and put in as many funny moments as they could early on in the film.
You're kind of like the captain, and Mike's kind of like your Gilligan.
The captain was fat, though.
Let's call it a thin captain.
Let's not call it the captain anymore, you illiterate TV people. It's the skipper.
With the crudeness of being an unconventional production and the actors being the ones in charge of filming their own coverage, the edit allowed for even more creativity with getting information across for the plot's sake. With two actors mostly filming the forest and the backs of people's heads, and one actor pointing the microphone, there were many instances in the edit where they could take dialogue from earlier scenes and put it on top of footage from later scenes. So if dialogue was spoken that was important to the plot, but the scene wasn't that interesting, they could take that dialogue and repurpose it for a more interesting scene. But since it's within the rough format of found footage, there was no need for studio redubbing later. Another interesting point to note, there's some instances where the filmmakers knew when to cut out something that's boring but repurpose it for the sake of the narrative. For example, when they cross the stream on logs, we hear the dialogue of the characters anticipating crossing the river with their equipment. But
you want to go back and forth? You can do it that way?
I don't want to do this at all, but...
Okay, well let's do, we'll do it back and forth. Oh, what'd you drop?
Seeing as this isn't meant to be some big tense scene, we get a subtle montage rather than the characters discussing crossing the river, then they actually cross the river. Adding to the creativity of the sound mix, as the film plays out, they removed the atmosphere of the woods more and more, giving you a subconscious sense that the Blair Witch is truly isolating them in this evil forest.
Do you think that's them?
From a filmmaker's point of view, it's easy to understand why the characters kept bringing up the DAT recorder. If it wasn't for that, the audio we would have to listen to is just the camera mic from the High 8 camcorder. That being said, the lack of DAT recorder plays a role in the disturbing audio of the climax. Seeing as there are only 2 people left and both are using their cameras with the lights to see, only the audio is heard from the High 8 camcorder, seeing as the 16mm film cameras do not record sound.
Josh, is that you down there? Josh.
This results in hearing Heather's voice from a distance, even when it's her own point of view. But a testament to how the production itself was so innovative, the only time where there was second guessing about the film was with the iconic end shot. Once they knew what the film was, the producers at Artisan felt that the ending wasn't punchy enough and gave them more money to shoot alternative endings with what Mike was doing in the corner. Some with stick figures hanging, Mike hanging from a noose, Mike strapped to a big stick figure, but ultimately they stuck to the original chilling ending of Mike just standing in the corner. A final shot that will still be praised for its terrifying simplicity for decades to come.
heard about, and a few people have already seen its sneak previews in the past week, The Blair Witch Project.
One of the most profitable movies in Hollywood history. The movie is The Blair Witch Project.
My name's Lee Winnell, and I'm going to do a review of The Blair Witch Project, and I'm going to film it out in the forest.
It is my distinct pleasure to introduce to you the actress of The Blair Witch Project, Miss Heather Donahue.
Please welcome Heather Donahue.
Please welcome Heather Donahue.
As mentioned before, the Curse of the Blair Witch documentary was shown on the Sci-Fi Channel prior to the film's release. As a documentary that portrays the story of 3 missing film students as 100% real, it began building huge momentum. Regardless of the end credits giving away that it was fake, there was this brand new old legend for people to discover. The Witch of Burkittsville, formerly known as Blair. And not only that, but allegedly 5 years ago, 3 film students went missing in the woods of Blair chasing this apparent witch, and now their footage has been found. To market a cinematic release of a collection of lost footage from missing film students, you kinda had to play it as real. By playing the marketing material 100% straight that this footage is real and that the Blair Witch legend is real was one of the smartest moves following the film's innovative production and editing process. 6 months prior to the release of the Blair Witch Project, as the internet age began, they were encouraged to set up a site for the film to get more exposure to the youth. And rather than just explaining what the film was, they decided to keep the site in character along with the film. The website featured fake descriptions of the Heather, Mike, and Josh characters, as opposed to the actors. It featured all of the lore and backstory shown in the Sci-Fi Channel special. The website is also up in all of its late 90s internet glory. After the film had generated massive buzz on the internet, they kept the deceptive marketing going by posting missing flyers at the Sundance Film Festival where the movie exploded. There, the film was bought by Artisan for a record-breaking $1 million, the highest payment for the rights of an independent film at the time. Here they kept the marketing and promotion going with Blair Witch tie-in books, graphic novels, and even video games. What was an experimental 8-day shoot in the woods turned out to be one of the most profitable independent movies of all time, but that success wasn't to be that long-lived.
Artisan wants to make another Blair film, and whether we're going to be involved or not, we have a story, we have an idea that we're excited about. But I mean, you know, our big thing with Blair is that we would rather have somebody else ruin it than have us ruin it. And if we really don't have any good ideas, or if they're not going to let us do the idea that we want to do, we'd rather let them have a shot at it and see if they can do something good with it. And if not, we can just say, hey, we didn't do it.
Within the next 12 months, Artisan had rushed a sequel into production, Book of Shadows Blair Witch 2. Without the original directors and producers returning, the film was released to poor reviews and a disappointing box office. The sequel dropped the found footage gimmick in favor of a traditional narrative, and rather than utilizing any of the rich lore and backstory directors Daniel Myrick and Eduardo Sanchez developed for the original project, they instead made a meta movie. It's also horrifically stuck in the year 2000. 16 years later, an attempt at a soft reboot was released, simply titled Blair Witch. Returning to the subgenre of found footage, Blair Witch attempted to get the series back on track, and it was also met with poor reviews, and in my personal opinion, was one of the most pathetic, uninspired rehashes of a property with such a unique origin, but that rant is for another time. There was also a video game released shortly after. Wasn't as poorly received, but it still felt like another sense of too little too late. Fortunately, this is an instance where the original film gets to stand tall, as the lightning in a bottle success it was. As mentioned before, it was paranormal activity that boomed the found footage genre, despite the Blair Witch Project being a bigger cultural phenomenon. But what Paranormal Activity was able to give studios and up-and-coming filmmakers was a formula for found footage. One day a camera gets turned on, some vague setup to a haunting, a bunch of jump scares, and then abruptly ends with a sequel setup. The Blair Witch Project, on the other hand, offers no template or formula. Well, not an easy one anyway. With the improvisational production in the woods, changing the story on the fly to see where the actors would take it, leaving the horror up to the minds of the audience, what a terrifying risk for studios. Making a movie on such a minuscule budget that brought in a box office return of blockbuster proportions. Studios would have been scratching their heads trying to figure out how to recapture that success. But once again, this film just could not be a better example of lightning in a bottle. Every aspect of the production, editing, marketing, and even the year it came out was all right place, right time.
Not only did Blair Witch pave a way for so many films to come and inspire so many indie filmmakers around the world to create their own productions on such a shoestring budget, this film is proof that less is more, and we definitely see that in the ending, which I just adore. But it's also one of those films that just work for some people and not for others. Obviously, having the backstory changes the way you perceive the film, and with how social media has gone today, there is a lot of storytelling within marketing for films, so I don't think it would have its same effect. But that doesn't erase this pop culture phenomenon that was created by the Blair Witch Project and is forever cemented as one of the pioneers for modern horror. The Blair Witch Project is a lesson on focusing on the editing and building tension as you go, and obviously, it paid off.
The Blair Witch Project was a childhood favorite of mine, but after learning about the behind the scenes of the film's production, it was then cemented as an important piece of cinema history in my eyes. When this film gets praised for being so effective on such a low budget, honestly feels like an understatement. This movie gave new meaning to the term simple but effective. My biggest respect for this film is that it was so innovative regardless of the tiny budget, being the first proper example of a found footage movie, and no one could rip off its success until another 10 years. I love the Blair Witch Project because despite being made for so cheap, it's not actually a cheaply made movie. It was fine-tuned and well-crafted for an audience. It wasn't slapped together to bank on the success of something else. And whether the debate continues if it invented the found footage genre or not, it revolutionized the genre, as well as viral marketing. And regardless of not looking cinematic, it's still an experience made for an audience. I still strongly believe that this movie deserves all the success it got. It was a game changer on so many levels, and it didn't need a budget of a blockbuster. And that's why the Blair Witch Project is a masterclass of cinema.
Go, fucking go! You're lost. You're angry in the woods. There's a fucking witch and she keeps leaving shit outside your door. She left little trinkets. You fucking took one of them. There's no one here to help you. That's your motivation.